Do God or gods, whatever they are named by, whatever name you call them, do they care about what human beings, mere human beings, say about them? Now, nobody's met God, so we don't know that answer. But the fact is that it's human beings, it's the followers who then become protectors of the God that they pray to, and that causes complications. And that is what leads to concepts like blasphemy. Blasphemy is when you insult my religious feelings, or I insult your religious feelings, or somebody insults somebody's religious feelings, you are blaspheming my God or my religion or my holy book or my scriptures or my places of worship. Now, this is not a new concept. In fact, the word blasphemy comes from Greek, like many other complicated expressions come. So forget how it started, etc., etc. But today, the important thing, as we see these protests breaking out in large parts of the country, particularly after Friday prayers, we've seen protest notes and quite a bit of anger in the Islamic world. Many of those countries are close friends of India, like the Gulf countries. India has made amends, BJP has made amends by suspending one of the people who allegedly caused offense and have sacked the other one from their party just to pour oil over troubled waters. But it looks like BJP's and the central government's actions have calmed down the international situation. But this is now spilling over on the streets in India, particularly in cities and places where there are sizable Muslim populations, because Muslims are angry. Now, what are they demanding? They are demanding that people who uttered these words allegedly insulting of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, they should be arrested. Now the question arises, and the question you might ask me immediately is, does India have blasphemy laws? We hear about blasphemy laws in Pakistan. We hear about cases like Asia Bibi's case, who was given a death sentence for, again, she was convicted, not merely allegedly, she was convicted for blaspheming the Holy Prophet. She was later acquitted by the Supreme Court of Pakistan, but that also was not accepted by the public opinion in Pakistan. So India does not have a law like that, but India does have some kind of a blasphemy law, or India has some kind of a law which can today be defined or can be interpreted as a blasphemy law. That is essentially section 295 of Indian Penal Code. Now that's a very interesting section, because if you read that section, and I'll have the text run on the screen as I'm talking, because I will not read all of it, because a lot of it is just legalese, and sometimes you will see that the difference between the main section and subsections is very small. For example, the first section, the parent section, which is 295, that talks about, number one, destruction deliberate. Everything has to be deliberate and conscious and intentional. Now that's a call that a court will make ultimately, but today police can make, a mob can make, and that's a call. Somebody who feels offended by what somebody might have done can also make. So main section says, anybody who knowingly, intentionally causes destruction, damage, defilement of a place of worship or an object held sacred by any community with intent to insult the religion and class of a person would be guilty under this law, or can be tried under this law, or can be prosecuted under this law. That is the main section. Now, before the main section, there is, I said this is the parent section, but uska bhi ek parent hai. So there is a grandparent of the next section we'll talk about, which is 295A, because that was also born later. The grandparent is a section called 153A. Now 153A is not specific to religion. It says anybody who deliberately, intentionally causes enmity between different groups. These can be different groups of different on the basis of religion, race, place of residence, language, caste, community, etc., etc. So and so will be prosecuted. So that is the larger umbrella section. Then 295. Now 295 was a section that the British brought in 1860. They brought in 1860, 295 and a couple more after this, which don't matter so much in India particularly because they are all derived from this. And I will tell you how these have been further derived in Pakistan, particularly in Zia's times, because that also points out to us the perils if we take the question of blasphemy too far or blasphemy laws too far. So 295 the British brought in 1860 and other laws linked to 295, following 295, 296, 297, 298, etc., etc. But they kept these universal. So these were blasphemy laws of a kind, but these were truly secular blasphemy laws, if I could use such an expression, which means these then gave protection to all faiths, all religious groups from insults or damage by any of the others. So anybody felt offended by something somebody said or did or somebody gestured, right? You had recourse to this law. So this was basically a law intended to persuade people with the force of law to respect other religions, because even the British knew that this is a very diverse country, this has a very complex history, and various religious communities live together, work together. They are not ghettoized, right? They have a lot of businesses, lives to share. So this will keep some kind of a discipline. So 295. Then something happened. The reason we said 295 is the parent of 295A. So what is 295A? 295A then goes forward. 295 talks about destruction of a religious installation or a place of worship or a religious scripture or a book or something held sacred. 295A then crosses a Rubicon. It says also insult by way of speech. And it has to be, in all interpretation, it has to be an aggravated form of insult by way of words, signs, visible gestures. So that is the difference. 295, the parent said, if you destroy a place of worship, if you defile a holy scripture, etc., etc., or maybe a deity, or maybe an idol. But this one now says that if you insult somebody's religion, somebody thinks you insulted their religion by way of words, signs, visible gestures, writing, then it becomes an offense. It becomes an offense where police can arrest without warrant. It is cognizable and it is non-bailable. So this is also a law which can be misused a great deal, because then it's for any plaintiff to say that from whatever somebody said, I felt insulted. So for example, remember that old Raj Kapoor film. That Raj Kapoor film had that song, Mujhko Yaro Maaf Karna Main Nashe Mein Hu, right? Now, how does it begin? It says, Qasid sharab peene de masjid mein बैठ कर, या वो जगह बता दे जहाँ पर खुदा ना हो. Which says, Qasid, the virtue signaler, right, who's telling everybody how to be the perfect man, you'll either let me drink in the mosque or tell me a place where God doesn't exist or where God doesn't reside. Is there any such place where God doesn't reside? Now, this was a philosophical point. I don't know in today's environment how will this work. Now, this is precisely the line, and this is precisely the song, the line from this song that Amir Khan used in the movie PK as well. And that got protests from the Muslim side, whereas there was a lot more protest from the Hindu side saying that this was only said in the passing, but there was a lot more mocking of Hindu gods and Hindu religious practices. But again, that is something that I will talk about. What I'm saying is that even cartooning in this case could be covered by the vast expanse of 295A, which is open to all kinds of interpretation. जो जिसकी श्रद्धा है, इसको वही interpret वैसे ही कर सकता है. That is 295A. Now, the reason we call 295 the father of 295A, or 295A the offspring or the child of 295, is because in the original law that the British brought in 1860, 295A wasn't there. In the mid-1920s, that infamous incident took place when an Arya Samajist writer or Arya Samajist follower wrote a book called Rangila Rasool, referring to the Holy Prophet, which the Muslims found offensive. He said he was responding to something which was written by the Muslim side about Hindu gods, which he found offensive. Now, the fact is, unfortunately, that he was assassinated. He was assassinated, and the man who assassinated him, the Muslim who assassinated him, was immediately hailed as a hero. The great Muslim lawyers, if I remember correctly, even Jinnah landed up to defend him in the court, but he was given the death sentence. He was hanged. Muslim celebrities, including Iqbal, poet Iqbal of the Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara fame, he attended the funeral because he was seen as a Muslim hero who had avenged blasphemy. Now, after that, the British added one more subsection, and that subsection was 295A. That was precisely to prevent publication of stuff like that, books like that, or articles, cartoons, speech on a TV channel, etc. Again, to give a kind of comfort or a pressure valve that if you are upset, come to us, the law, and we will arrest a person or prosecute a person, because under these sections the person can be prosecuted and your religious feelings can be protected. So don't break the law. Don't pick up a gun, don't pick up a knife, etc., etc. It hasn't always worked, as we saw some time back in the case of Kamlesh Tiwari, who was a Hindu activist who was brutally assassinated. I think he had about 13 stab wounds after being shot, and most of those stab wounds were in his neck area. So it hasn't always worked, because we are getting more and more polarized, but that is the intention with which this law came in. So this 295A has been on the books since 1927, and this was in response to that Rangila Rasool incident, and the British thought with this they'll be able to find a solution. That's why this law has remained. Now we know that when our constitution was passed, Article 19, which gives us freedom of speech, this was amended. That was the first amendment in our constitution. That has laid some reasonable restrictions on our freedom of speech. So this 295, 295A, 153, and then if you go on, also 505, these define those reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable restrictions on speech. And this was challenged. 295A was challenged in the Supreme Court of India, and a 5-judge constitution bench upheld it in 1957. So that is an important point to note. Everybody's expectation must have been that with the passage of time, as we become more mature, as we become more modern, we will become less thin-skinned. But obviously that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened partly because, say, in the neighboring countries, say in Pakistan, blasphemy laws reached quite another level, because Zia-ul Haq, when he took over power, he thought this wasn't enough, because he was Islamizing in a very big way. Because how does a dictator justify taking over power just like that and becoming the chief martial law administrator? So he said, I am protecting Islam and I am bringing in Nizam-e-Mustafa, that is the puritanical rule of the Islamic law. And he then added other subsections to what we call IPC 295, what they would call Pakistan Penal Code, PPC 295, because basically they inherited their penal code from the British as much as we did. Now in 295, we had 295A. Now all these sections, whether it's 153, 295, 295A, 296, 290, and up to 298 and 505, the maximum sentence is generally sort of in the 3-year range. And convictions have rarely taken place, if at all. In fact, I tried to search. I had my colleague Bhadra Sinha, who's our senior editor covering the laws and the courts, and we tried to even look at the NCRB, that is National Crime Research Bureau, their data to see if there were many convictions under 295A. We frankly did not find any. Maybe there have been some, but very few. But in this case, he went beyond 295A and he created a blasphemy law which was not a secular blasphemy law. So he created 295B and C. These referred purely and entirely to blasphemy offending the Muslims. So 295B, for example, said that if you defile the Holy Quran, or if you defile even an authorized commentary or a section of the holy books of the scriptures, then you can get a sentence up to life sentence, right? So this is not now 2 years, 1 year and all that, right? It's straight life sentence. And if you then say, and then he added one more section, 295C, and he said, if somebody says something, somebody says, indicates, writes some things which is insulting of the holy prophet, then that will draw a sentence of life or death or plus fine, etc., etc. So he added these two. The important thing is these two only give this privilege of protection from what is seen as blasphemy by Muslims, not others. In fact, if you look at many interpretations, it would seem that in under other sects of Islam, if you had variations in the Quran, that might also be seen as blasphemous. So in Pakistan, we've even had cases of blasphemy against people who said that I dreamt of something like this, which was considered blasphemous. So that has gone too far. Now we have to think about this carefully, and that's the reason I brought these examples. This is not to say Pakistanis are worse than India. This is to say that we should also be careful. And as we go towards the concluding part of this episode of Cut the Clutter, there will be a fair bit of opinion. Now see where Pakistan has taken this. You know the case of Asia Bibi in Pakistan. Asia Bibi or Asia Noreen. Asia Noreen was a very poor Christian woman in Pakistan, in sort of the same area as Nankana Sahib is, the same district, a village woman. And she was plucking falsas. So I don't think it's that relevant, but its botanical name is Grevia, Grewia asiatica. But we know that in summertime, this is the season for falsas. You made sharbat out of it, and if your teeth are good enough, you just chew it with the seeds. It's wonderful. Even we have a tiny bush of it. So they were plucking falsa berries. So there was a bunch of Muslim women, and there was Asia Bibi, the Christian woman. Now, there is something that we must remember when we look at the persecution of Christians in Pakistan. Because many of the Christians in Pakistan are from the former scavenger community, or what might be called Safai Karmchari community in India. Now, they did not come to India during the partition because they thought, look, we'll get caste discrimination in any case. So we will be doing the same job. So we might as well stay on here. What are our stakes? And most of them actually converted to Christianity. So this woman, while they were plucking the falsa berries, and it would have happened at the peak of summer because that is when falsa ripens, she got thirsty and she pulled out water from a well somewhere near the orchards where they were plucking, and poured it into an iron cup that was lying by the side of the well and drank water from it. As she did that, other women, Muslim women, took umbrage and they said, you can't be doing this because you are unclean. Now that was a reference also to her caste. And they said, you are unclean because of your caste, obviously, and also because you are a Christian. Now apparently she argued back, and the allegation was that she said something that wasn't kind about the Holy Prophet, which she denied later. But all these women got together because they had lots of disputes amongst them, like usual gali ka ladai in a village, and she was prosecuted for blasphemy. In a couple of days, a local Maulvi got involved, who then even made her alleged statements even more colorful, and she was convicted by the trial court and sentenced to death. That sentence was later set aside by the Pakistani Supreme Court. But you know what happened as a result of that? That Salman Taseer, the governor of Pakistani Punjab then, the father of Atish Taseer, the writer, he tried to help her. He met her in jail for that so-called quote-unquote crime. he was assassinated. He was assassinated on 4th of January 2011 by none else than Malik Mumtaz Husain Qadri, one of the cops on his own security detail, and he was hailed as a hero. He was later sentenced to death and hanged on 29th February 2016. In fact, when Salman Taseer was assassinated, 500 Sufi Barelvi clerics got together and issued an appeal or a fatwa or whatever to Muslims not to send him condolence messages. Then, shortly after he was assassinated, Salman Taseer was assassinated, Shehbaz Bhatti, who was then Minority Affairs Minister in Pakistani cabinet and the lone Christian in Pakistani cabinet, was also assassinated. So that is just an example that if you let this thing go out of control, if our communities get so overly sensitive, so thin-skinned, then there'll be no end to it, and India will find it very difficult to maintain its social cohesion. And that's why my view has been, and I will share an article I wrote in 2015, in January 2015. That was in the week when the Charlie Hebdo killings took place in France. And I said basically that while I might defend the right of anybody to say what they are saying, but I will not publish the same thing, and I will not show my solidarity by publish the same thing, because I don't believe that the right to offend is universal. You can give as much offense to the other person as the other person is willing to take. I mean, if you're a family loving cats and dogs, like my family, we can refer to a family member, a child, oi kutte, oi billy, like that. But if somebody doesn't like to be called that, then you can't use that expression. You cannot offend people if they are, you cannot say things to offend people. What is mere terms of endearment for somebody can be deeply offensive to another. So you've got to exercise your discretion. There is no absolute right to offend, or at least I believe there should not be an absolute right to offend. That might be a conservative view of freedom of speech, but that has remained my view, and that is something which I think is where India needs to go even now. And this law, whatever this law is a mild law. It's a mild law, but it's a deterrent. And this should be respected because India needs to have social cohesion. Now, one more reason I mention this is that a lot of people have complained about our 50-word edit today. Please see it on the screen, where we have also said the same thing that, pour oil over troubled waters. India needs social cohesion. There is no right to offend. There is no right to offend Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, anybody. Now, blasphemy, of course, is a large intellectual debate, and this will go on. And I do remember I anchored the first big cover story I anchored in India Today when I had just become editor. Cover story done by others. I had written many of my own. Was when the fatwa was issued on Salman Rushdie. And we quoted in that story Leon Vicentier, who used to be the editor of the New Republic, who said then, and who was quoted by us as saying, "Thank God for blasphemy, because blasphemy made us free." Right? Thank God for blasphemy, right? Because God doesn't mind if you say something which other people might find insulting, but God is not here. If other people are insulted, in my book, it's best not to do it. And that is the reason I have a different view, say, on the M.F. Husain case. M.F. Husain painted Hindu gods and goddesses in the manner that he wanted to paint. All right, he might say that's my freedom of expression. So he is exercising his freedom of expression. Now, similarly, those who were offended by this, that's a lot of Hindus, they also had the freedom to protest against it as long as it was peaceful, it was not violent, and also to take resort to the law, in this case variants of sections of 295, to go to court and seek legal lawful redressal, because they were then using the law and the constitution and that system to get their grievances answered. That's why I did not fully identify with the idea then, or the view then, that M.F. Husain was so harassed and he was so threatened in India that he had to leave for Qatar. I stick my neck out and I do reckless things quite often. But you know what? When you believe something to be the truth, then you should not be afraid of speaking it. I haven't believed for a day that MF Husain's sudden departure for Qatar, which is no paragon of religious freedoms, liberalism, etc., that departure did not have so much to do with his freedom of speech or freedom of painting or because he feared for his life. That was more to do with the fact that Qatar is a country with no capital gains tax. And all those paintings are worth hundreds of crores of rupees. Having said that, what could he have done? He was a powerful, privileged person, not short of money, had the best lawyers, UPA was in power. He should have faced the law and made his point in the court. On the other hand, by going away, he strengthened the side that believes that this law is used selectively to protect only some faiths and not others.